The hull is broken up into two areas, the top level and the curvature of the hull is the second level, and then the keels are separate from the hull. So this is the copper coat on a 2013 Island Spirit catamaran that was 7 years old, and it's starting to show terrible signs of wear and tear. So you can see the pit marks in here. They don't look like osmosis, and the copper coat tearing away from the primer, and the pit marks are down to the fairing. And that's generally all over the boat. There are worse areas. There are very few areas of real severe and varied damage, and this is the one of the worst, where you can see that the filler, the fairing and the copper coat are just tearing away. My main problem here is, what should I do with it? Should I bring it back to the GRP hull, or as far as I can back to fairing? In other words, bare minimum put it back to the fairing, and maximum cut it, sand it right back to the GRP hull. See here, it's already back to the hull. So that's what I have some questions about. Some areas of copper coat have broken right away, as you can see here, and it's on the inner side of the hull, and you wouldn't expect the wear and tear to be as severe as that after 7 years. So this area is on the opposite side of the rectangular area, so they pretty much match, and probably are the sling areas that have been painted later before it's been put back in the water on the last time it was hauled out, which I wasn't involved in. Here's another area where the sling matches the slings on the other side, on the other hull, where they haven't faired it. They've just cleaned it up, stripped it back, painted on the copper coat. Whether they've put on a primer or not, I can't tell, but it looks like it's just copper coat straight over the top of the GRP fiberglass, and has worn off over the period of time between the last time it was hauled out and now. The wear and tear on the hull is pitted and cratered, and this is another example of me thinking I should bring it back to the fairing or back to the fiberglass hull, and I'm not sure about that. Brought some areas of what you can see here is that osmosis of some kind. When it's sanded back, it doesn't blister, it just shows up in two different ways. You bring it back to the fairing and you get a different sort of a layering of this is why I've got the question, should I be bringing these areas back to the glass, or is this sufficient to bring it back to the fairing and then fair over the top of that? There's a better example of, can I fair over the top of those chip areas of the fairing, or should I be bringing it right back to the glass? Up here, where there was a number of areas of damage that are brought right back to nearly to the glass, and this is the comparison I'm looking at. Should I be bringing it back to the glass or bringing it back to the fairing? There are a number of areas where there's no pitting, and I'm just wondering whether I can get away with sanding it back using 120 grit to this stage. Just roughing the surfaces up, then giving them the appropriate coats of primer and then the appropriate amount of coats of copper coat. And then some of that pitting is so minor that would the primer be good enough, or should it be faired? And should it be rounded out before fairing? I've brought back some of them to nearly the glass, and you can see how the pitting is still there. My problem is that how far do I take it back? Now I've thought it through and come up with this idea of using the drill to round out the pit marks, fill them with fairing, and then fair over the top of that with one or two coats. If I use the rounding tool and do that to the holes, am I able to then fill the holes and then fair over the top of it to one or two layers, and then primer and then copper coat?